It started like many mornings before it, quiet, thick with humidity, and charged with the invisible electricity of a nation always waiting for the next spark. But this spark didn't come from Capitol Hill, a Supreme Court ruling, or a military parade. It came from a phone, held steady by the hand of a former president who still believed the world should revolve when he pressed post. At exactly 7:14 a.m., Donald Trump sent a video clip out into the bloodstream of American media. It wasn't long, 38 seconds, but it didn't have to be. The message wasn't designed to inform. It was designed to wound. You call that a congresswoman or a rising star? No, I call that a national mistake. The words dragged across the screen like a slow tear in parchment. He filmed it himself, sitting at his desk in Mar-a-Lago, the golden drapes behind him drawn just enough to let in a single strand of morning light. No advisors, no teleprompter, just him and his certainty. Within 40 seconds, MSNBC scrapped its planned market preview. The screen turned red. CNN's ticker twisted itself into a real-time loop. Trump declares Crockett a national mistake, demands response from DOJ. Across Washington, phones began vibrating like nerves. Legal aides started forwarding the clip to one another. Press secretaries scrolled in disbelief. There was no script, no policy note, no agenda, just raw digital ammunition, and every newsroom knew they had been handed a match with a short fuse. By 7:23, Fox News had cut to a visibly irate Judge Jeanine Pirro declaring, "She better be careful, she's not too bright. You don't talk to the Attorney General like that." Beneath the video, Trump typed a 5-word caption, "Watch this, she's unfit." It didn't need hashtags, it didn't need context, it already had impact. At 7:34, an alert hit Capitol Hill inboxes from the House Oversight Committee. Subject line, none. Sender, none. It read only, 9 a.m. Vertical Bar, Rayburn House Building, Room 2274. Vertical Bar bring questions. No campaign logo, no spokesperson, no political handler trying to soften the blow. Just a place and a time, like a courtroom summons, signed only by urgency itself. The House wasn't divided. It was awakening. At 8:59 a.m., room 2274 was filled to capacity. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Only cameras adjusting their focus, journalists setting pens to blank pages, and the tension of expectation so thick it could anchor the air itself. Then the left side door opened. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped in, and for a moment, time slowed. She wore a tailored black suit, silver-rimmed glasses that caught the ceiling light, and a presence that made the press forget they were waiting for a speech. She didn't need a microphone. She brought something heavier than volume. She stepped to the table, placed her hands flat against its polished surface, and looked not at the cameras, not even at the committee, but directly at the seat across from her. Still empty. I heard what he said. No need to quote it. No need to amplify it. Once was enough. This isn't the voice of a statesman. It's a spear thrown at the foundation of representation. Every word she spoke arrived like it was pulled from the breath of history. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She anchored herself in the truth she carried. I wasn't elected to clap back. I was elected to hold my word. Representation isn't an honor. It's a pact, written in the silences others once endured. She paused. And today, I'm not here to read that pact aloud. I'm here to enforce it. From the back, a soft noise. A cameraman adjusted his lens. A reporter glanced at their watch. And then the right side door opened. There was no music, no opening statement, no clearance from staff, just movement. Donald Trump entered the chamber like a man who had just walked into his own boardroom. Navy suit, red tie, not a single paper in hand. He didn't break stride, didn't nod, didn't pause. 8 paces forward, and he stopped at the opposite podium. No introduction needed. The press recognized his posture like a logo. The room, once neutral, was now a frame. Trump and Crockett, not on two sides of an issue, but of a definition, of power. Trump looked directly at her. A contract? Voter trust? You talk like you're the moral compass of this swamp. But voters don't elect speeches. They elect winners. He let it sit. Then he smiled, like he'd just struck a chord. The only thing you've delivered is chaos and a ratings boost for MSNBC. You quote laws. I run a country. You interpret. I execute. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was an invasion. And if this is what representation looks like, maybe it's time we redefine what a congresswoman is, before it becomes a title handed to whoever talks the most and does the least. The press held their breath. The cameras tilted to catch Crockett's face, but she didn't blink. She stood in her stance like nothing had changed. Only the air had. She didn't move quickly, just enough. A half step forward, hands still resting on the table. "You want to talk about results?" she asked. "Fine, let's talk about Eduardo Reyes." Trump's brow twitched. A man deported while under a court-protected stay. A man who should be walking his son to school this morning, not listed in a footnote from ICE records. His only crime? She paused. Being caught in the crossfire of a political machine that values headlines more than human lives. Trump leaned on the edge of his podium, 2 fingers pressed firm. "That's emotional theater. You're romanticizing a tragedy to cover for your lack of policy." Crockett laughed softly. "You think it's performance. But I've seen the aftermath. I don't manage networks. I manage clauses. I read legislation. I vote. And I remember." She opened a folder, drew out a single paper. "This," she said, holding up the deportation order, "isn't a speech prop. It's a signature, signed against a court ruling, filed 6 hours after your video went live." The room tightened. "You call yourself a leader, but the only thing you led was the erasure of a man who couldn't afford a lawyer, let alone a press conference." Trump's lips parted, but the reporters were no longer looking at him. Their eyes were on the paper, the signature, the timestamp, and something had shifted. For the first time since he entered, Trump wasn't commanding the moment. He was caught inside one. It was no longer a press briefing. The air had changed. It had the density of courtrooms and the scent of history in the making. The press no longer whispered notes. They wrote them like legal testimony. The door at the rear creaked, but no one turned to look. Everyone was focused on the podiums, until a figure stepped through. Quiet, composed, intentional. Adam Schiff. He carried no file. Just a single folder and the posture of someone who only spoke when the evidence did. He took a seat 3 chairs down from Crockett and nodded, not to her, but to the story already unfolding. Trump turned toward him, his stance tightening. "More theater?" he said. "More allies showing up to save the performance." Schiff didn't respond. He placed the folder on the table, opened it slowly, and spoke without looking up. "Within 48 hours of the video you shared, 2 internal DOJ files tied to Mr. Eduardo Reyes were wiped. No authorization, no signature, just gone. But IP logs don't lie." The press froze. MSNBC cut in with a split screen. CNN ran a new ticker. Schiff confirms DOJ file. Wipe. Crockett didn't turn to Schiff. She stayed facing Trump. "So tell me," she said, "is that a reaction? Or a campaign calculated to silence someone who never had a chance to speak for himself?" Trump shifted. "I don't order deportations. That's not how it works." Schiff finally looked up. "But social pressure does, especially when it comes from the account of a former president, especially when it includes the words 'she's unfit.'" The silence returned, but now it sounded like accountability. Trump pushed back from the podium slightly. "You act like you're a martyr, You're not. You speak in headlines, TikTok clips, emotional bursts. Crockett didn't blink. And you speak in absolutes, like you alone have the blueprint. But blueprints don't erase lives. She held up the deportation order again. This isn't a headline, it's a life. It's a man who had legal standing in this country. Until a video you shared turned due process into digital execution. Trump leaned in. I shared a clip. I didn't sign anything, and I didn't produce it. The American people made it viral. Crockett exhaled. That's the problem. You act like virality is a verdict. But it isn't. It's an echo. And echoes can erase people, too, a CNN reporter scribbled furiously. Then maybe we should stop treating sound bites like subpoenas, Trump snapped. Schiff cut in, measured and soft. But we don't ignore evidence just because it came with a camera flash. The room held its breath. Trump looked at Schiff, then Crockett, then the table where the deportation letter lay. For the first time, he didn't speak. It was 10:02 a.m. when CNN broke the confirmation. Exclusive DOJ logs tied to Trump post triggered file deletion. MSNBC flashed a black and white image of Eduardo Reyes, 29, teacher, volunteer, removed from his home at 3:08 a.m. after a court had ruled in his favor. A mistake, the officer had said. A decision his superior later corrected. The file deletion happened 6 hours after Trump's video. The media didn't need a conspiracy board. They had a timeline. They had a cause and effect. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand. She simply placed the document down at the center of the table. Not for Trump, not even for Schiff, but for the cameras, for the people watching. This is where he should have been heard, she said. But he wasn't. Because someone thought media impact was greater than legal standing. Trump crossed his arms, but the press didn't flinch. The moment had landed, and it didn't land in his favor. By 10:09, Fox News had switched to a live discussion. One panelist spoke quietly off mic. We need to recheck the 8 o'clock segment. There might be liability. Twitter exploded. #Reyes record trended at 38,000 mentions in 11 minutes. Even the American Bar Association tweeted, a man deported against a court order, a file deleted after a video. We don't need a ruling. We have a timeline. Trump glanced around the room. For the first time, he wasn't being followed by the cameras. He was being watched. And there is a difference. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. If I'm guilty of anything, he said, it's believing that the American people want strength over sentiment. Crockett looked straight into the lens. And if I'm guilty of anything, she said, it's believing that the law should still mean something, even when there are cameras. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She didn't claim victory. She just spoke the kind of sentence that doesn't need applause to matter. And the country, for one suspended moment, listened. It was subtle at first. A hesitation in Trump's delivery, a tightening of his grip on the edge of the podium. The man who had once dominated headlines with a single word now stood beneath the weight of too many. The cameras no longer hung on his every sentence. They were shifting, adjusting, zooming slowly toward the table, the document, the congresswoman who refused to sit down. Trump squared his shoulders and tried again. You call this justice? A press briefing turned into a trial, built on one deportation story and a deleted file. I've built energy maps. I've rewritten trade deals. I've stood across from dictators and made them blink. And you're standing on a story you can't even prove. Came from me. Crockett didn't move. Her stillness was more piercing than protest. You want evidence? Let me remind you, no one said your name. You entered this room like it belonged to you. But power isn't about showing up. It's about what remains after you leave. Schiff leaned forward. Power doesn't evaporate. It erodes, slowly, and usually the first sign is when people stop responding to it with fear. Trump shook his head. You're trying to turn this into some kind of reckoning, but it's just another news cycle. Crockett answered quietly. Maybe. But even a single drop can tip the scale if the system's already on edge. And in that moment, it was clear. The system had already tilted. The chamber didn't empty all at once. The end came not like a gavel, but like a breath being exhaled after too long held. Trump stood still, but the spotlight that once clung to him had begun to scatter. The cameras no longer followed him as a subject, but watched him as a figure receding into the backdrop of a different story. Crockett opened her folder one last time. From it, she drew the document, the deportation order bearing Eduardo Reyes's name, the green stamp still slightly smudged, the ink of a justice system that had once misfired and pretended it hadn't. She placed it in the center of the table, not to hand it over, not to make a scene, but to leave it where it belonged, in plain view, no longer a mistake, no longer forgotten. Trump turned slowly, not toward a microphone, but toward the side exit. His shadow stretched across the floor, once a symbol of reach, now fractured by the soft, golden light that pierced the tall glass windows. He paused, looked back. The cameras did not follow. At the far end, a young intern approached. They bent to pick up a fallen nameplate. They wiped it gently, placed it back on the desk in front, and stepped back. The plate read, Jasmine Crockett, Representative. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She remained at the table, her gaze steady, her posture firm. No proclamation, no victory pose, only presence. Outside, across Twitter and television screens, the trending hashtag shifted one last time. #Reyes record gave way to #erase no more. On PBS, a policy analyst read slowly, a name once deleted from the system, a file erased under political pressure, but today a member of Congress brought him back, not with power, but with a promise that never went missing. Schiff stood beside her now. No words exchanged. No need. The frame didn't need sound. It only needed memory. And history for once was listening.